In this pod-slice summary of the Ben Shapiro show, Ben Shapiro asserts that the recent surge in protests in support of Hamas is not rooted in solidarity with Palestinians, but rather to promote intimidation. He cites several hostile protests where Jews were reportedly assaulted and anti-Semitic sentiments were openly vocalized, suggesting that the size and aggressiveness of these rallies aim to instill fear. Shapiro discusses how protests across Western nations range from violent assaults on police officers to desecration of historic statues, all the while propagating slogans advocating for the extermination of Jews and the dissolution of Israel. He cites instances where Jewish students have been threatened and assaulted in numerous universities and highlights the rising fear among Jewish students in the UK due to anti-Semitic threats. Shapiro argues that the overt aggression and intimidation displayed in these rallies are not political, but are intended to show strength and inspire fear. He claims that these protesters aim to exploit what they view as Western weakness and to lateralize their sympathizers among the young populations. Drawing attention to the media's role, Shapiro criticizes the Washington Post for retracting a cartoon criticizing Hamas tactics after protests from readers. He accuses the editors of succumbing to the outrage fueled by radical protesters. He further criticizes the media for defending Hitler supporters who hate Israel, suggesting biased coverage. Shapiro cautions that protesters' aggressive behavior is being justified on the basis of alleged oppression and narratives of victimhood. He connects this to a similar pattern that emerged during the Charlie Hebdo scandal in 2006, culminating in the murder of 12 people at the Charlie Hebdo offices by Islamic radicals in 2015. Shapiro's call to action involves resisting intimidation, enforcing the law against violent protesters, and deporting non-citizens who support terrorist groups like Hamas. He concludes that unless the West displays strength and refuses to submit to such intimidation tactics, more terrorism, supporter of terrorism, and deaths of innocents can be expected. Ben Shapiro suggests that the protests in support of Hamas are strategic in their visible aggression, an attempt to tap into and exploit perceived Western weakness, scare people, and recruit younger individuals to join them. He contends that a similar pattern was seen earlier in the Charlie Hebdo scandal in 2006. Shapiro criticizes the media, particularly the Washington Post, for submitting to the outrage fueled by these protesters, insinuating a distinct bias in support of anti-Israel sentiments. Getting more specific, Shapiro describes the current state of protests across Western nations, ranging from violent attacks on police officers to desecration of important statues, with literal calls for the extermination of Jews and the dissolution of Israel. He further elaborates on the steadily rising fear among Jewish students in the UK due to recorded anti-Semitic threats and actual assaults. He shifts to discuss the role of media, expressing his disappointment with the Washington Post's decision to retract a cartoon criticizing Hamas tactics following reader protests. According to Shapiro, these acts of supposed press correction only fuel the outrage of radical protesters and undermine journalistic integrity. He accuses the media of defensively supporting Hitler supporters who hate Israel, thus implying media bias. Shapiro emphasizes that the aggressive behavior demonstrated by protesters is often justified based on narratives of their oppression and victimhood. He associates this trend with a similar pattern witnessed during the Charlie Hebdo scandal in 2006, which led to the murder of a dozen people at the Charlie Hebdo offices by Islamic radicals in 2015. Achieving a cultural and political pushback is Shapiro's call to action. He advocates for resistance against intimidation, strict enforcement of the law against violent protesters, and deportation of non-citizens who support terrorist groups like Hamas. He warns that unless the West displays strength and refuses to submit to intimidation tactics, more terrorism, increased support for terrorism, and additional deaths of innocent people are likely to follow. Ben Shapiro states that the protests occurring across Western nations in support of Hamas are not only a symbol of objection, but also an alarming display of aggression that he claims aims to exploit the perceived Western weakness. These protests, which have led to violent attacks on police officers, desecration of iconic statues, and explicit demands for the eradication of Israel and Jews, have engendered a palpable fear among Jewish students in the United Kingdom. He further criticizes the media's reaction to these events, particularly lamenting the Washington Post's decision to remove a cartoon that criticized Hamas's tactics in response to reader backlash. This act, Shapiro believes, perpetuates the outrage of radical protesters and subverts media impartiality. He asserts that such actions reflect media bias, as he accuses the media of defensively supporting actual Hitler supporters who hate Israel. Drawing a parallel with the Charlie Hebdo scandal, he states that aggressive behaviors by protesters are frequently justified on grounds of their oppression and victimhood. He argues that accommodating such behaviors only invites more of the same, leading inevitably to more terrorism and loss of innocent lives. Instead, Shapiro advocates for a cultural and political pushback, promoting resistance against intimidation, strict law enforcement against violent protesters, and deportation of non-citizens who pledge allegiance to terrorist groups such as Hamas. According to Shapiro, the West must exhibit strength and refusal to submit to intimidation tactics to prevent an escalation in terrorism. Regarding protests in France, Shapiro made references to the rise of Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party. Le Pen has recently been attending anti-Semitism rallies, and Shapiro claims this is a premeditated political move in response to the perceived threats from France's growing Muslim population and consequent rising tensions in the West. He contends that Le Pen's increasing popularity signals a shift in public sentiment and represents a pushback from Western societies against the spread of radical Islam. Shapiro also pointed out Joe Biden's ongoing political struggles, asserting that the U.S. president's approval ratings have continued to remain stagnant due to a number of complex issues, one of them being illegal immigration. He makes reference to a recent video making its way around social media, wherein illegal immigrants were shown cheering for Joe Biden, which he believes will be detrimental to Biden's image and exploited for political gains by Republican opponents. In conclusion, Shapiro suggests the West's current stance on radical Islam will be a critical determinant of future political dynamics and societal harmony. If the status quo of perceived weakness towards radical Islam continues, Shapiro contends that it foreshadows a bleak future for Western societies. To dive deep into this topic, Ben Shapiro discusses Texas borderland disputes in clandestine spots where illegal immigrants often secretly cross over. He mentioned the islands scattered along the Rio Grande, which Texas reclaimed to curb illegal border crossings. Logically, records from the Department of Homeland Security indicate that not just Mexican migrants, but thousands of Chinese migrants have also crossed the border illegally via Mexico in 2023. Moreover, cartel soldiers are known to cross the border using these islands, hence creating severe security concerns for Texas. Digressing into another appalling illegal immigration crime, Shapiro notes a case of an illegal Honduran immigrant arrested for a series of grave crimes in Virginia. Interestingly, this individual had been arrested thrice on similar charges and somehow kept ending up on the streets. This case serves as a stark reminder of the numerous unidentified illegal immigrants residing in the country, raising concerns about safety. In the line of criticism, Shapiro notes Joe Biden's inaction on this issue, suggesting that it may pave the way for Donald Trump's return to the presidency. Shifting focus to the economy, Shapiro discusses the precarious situation faced by the Federal Reserve Chairman, Jerome Powell. Despite raising interest rates above 5%, inflation continues unabated due to wage price spirals, causing concerns for the average working citizen. Shapiro suggests that Powell could be increasing the risk of another severe financial crash, like the 2008 housing market crash. Looking to France, Shapiro mentions Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party, which has been increasingly participating in anti-Semitism rallies. He speculates that this could be a strategic political move in response to the growing threat of radical Islam and the rise in tensions in Western societies. Highlighting that Republicans are losing a series of elections, Shapiro brings up the fact that Democrat Joe Manchin's announcement that he will not run for re-election in Senate could open a door for Republicans. Since West Virginia voted the most for Donald Trump in the last election cycle, this could lead to the Republicans gaining an additional seat in the Senate, a breakthrough they desperately need. On the political front, Shapiro provides a detailed assessment of the Democrats' position in key states, emphasizing that Republicans have a shot at flipping many of these seats. Yet he remains cautious, since Republicans have a solid track record of substantial failure. In conclusion, Shapiro articulates a complicated blend of economic, political, and social dynamics present in the United States. From illegal immigration, political tactics, economic threats to Islamic radicalism, Shapiro's analysis spans a wide breadth of contemporary critical issues which demand the West's attention as they could be instrumental in shaping its future. Ben Shapiro delves further into the potential impacts of Democrat Joe Manchin's decision to not run for re-election in the Senate. He offers the perspective that Manchin could become part of a no-labels ticket, a nonpartisan group aimed at problem-solving across party lines. The potential of a third-party ticket featuring figures like Manchin and retired Republican Senator Mitt Romney establishes them as alternatives for individuals dissatisfied with party candidates. Highlighting the electoral dynamics, Shapiro underscores the locked levels of support for Joe Biden and Donald Trump. If no significant third-party contender emerges, votes will likely split in favor of Biden. Still, a serious third-party candidate could disrupt these predictions. Interestingly, Shapiro references Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is increasingly becoming the default what-if third-party candidate in various polls. Kennedy's relatively substantial support underscores the extent public dissatisfaction with current political choices. The analysis further elucidates the electoral dynamics, indicating that Trump has a higher base level of support but limited reach, while Biden seems to have an extendable reach but lower base support. Yet, in the case of a strong third-party alternative, the shift in voter preference may disproportionately affect Biden. Reverting back to Joe Manchin's affiliation with No Labels, Shapiro draws attention to the group's intentions of offering an alternative to Biden and Trump. However, this prospect encourages speculations if a Republican leads No Labels, which might exclude Manchin. Simultaneously, Maryland Governor Larry Hogan's interest in affiliating with no labels generates further intrigue. Shapiro concludes this segment without a conclusion, but pointing out the nervousness within the Democratic Party in face of unknown variables like a potential no labels or other third-party showing, and Manchin's retirement. The uncertainty echoes in whether the Democrats' potential strategy to attack Donald Trump can be effective, which seems largely dependent on fluctuating news cycles. Check out the full podcast by clicking the link in the description below. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for listening to this podcast summary episode of The Pod Slice.